Captain's log, stardate 12252011. Forgive me, I was having a Captain Picard moment there. I couldn't resist. It is Christmas Day as I set out to create this final chapter in the Baxter and Mark Chronicles. This last year has been a journey that has seen me living in 3 states, Colorado, Virginia, and now, finally, I have come full circle back to Orlando, Florida, the location of the Baxter and Mark Show's greatest success. In April of 2012, it will mark the 20-year anniversary that we were let go from WDIZ Radio in Orlando, bringing an end to our career as a morning radio team. This past year has seen my partner, Mark Szymanski, pass away, and it was shortly afterwards that I set out on this journey to chronicle our radio adventures together. Over these last 2 decades since our team ended, I have created successful shows on my own in New England and in the Virginia, D.C. area. Mark had stayed in the Orlando area for a few more years and had a couple of successful shows at other stations. He eventually moved back to Colorado, the place where we first started our adventure together. In the final year of Mark's life, I had also moved back to Colorado, partially in an effort to try to see if there was some way we could build something together again. Neither of us, separately, had success quite on the level of our show together, and we both knew that, as a team, we were at our best. The Baxter and Mark Show hit its peak in the early 90s in Orlando. We had a 10-year run as an extremely popular morning show in the market. We had created a multimedia presence with our radio show, frequent local TV involvement, and our live bands. We had traveled the world, taking listeners on trips to Hollywood, London, and Paris. We built a valuable brand name for ourselves and our station, WDIZ. Our last couple of years on the job together at DIZ saw pressure mounting on us from management. We were frequently being chastised and told to trim down our content and play more music, even though every instinct told us that that was not what our listeners wanted. After all, there were a lot of other places people could get the music, but this was the only place they could get the Baxter and Mark Show. We endured the systematic long-term browbeating. Maybe it was the company worrying that we were becoming stale to the audience after 10 years, although our ratings were still very high. Mark and I thought probably some of it was due to buyer's remorse, brought on by the company raising us to higher salaries a couple years before when they were worried we would leave. So near the end, they had brought in a new general manager named Tom Owens, a guy that clearly didn't get our show. I remember in our limited interaction with him during our remaining time at DIZ, he always seemed to have a puzzled expression on his face and walked around making notes on a little notepad that he carried. Neil, our program director, was still fairly new on the job, and as he himself mentioned in the previous chapter of these chronicles, found himself being tasked by the new GM, Tom, to test the viability of our morning show. I suppose that Mr. Owens, like many new managers, could have been looking for a way to make a name for himself with the company by restructuring the budget. He was new to Orlando and hadn't been around to experience the genesis of us building this market franchise with the Baxter and Mark Show. He seemed to have no sense of the value of that. Mark and I felt the mounting pressure daily. We hired a well-known radio agent to advise us. During that time, unbeknownst to us, the company had been approached by representatives of a rock morning show in Tampa, the Ron and Ron Show, to talk about replacing our show with a piped-in version of theirs for about half the cost of what they were paying us. That show was trying to start a syndication network and wanted Orlando to be their first stop. They knew it would not be an easy task if the Baxter and Mark Show was still on the air. In April of 1992, we were called into a meeting with our PD, Neil, and Tom Owens. I remember it was my birthday, and someone had hung up a Happy Birthday Baxter banner in the hallway at the offices. We sat across a table from management and got the news that it was over for the Baxter and Mark Show at WDIZ. They told us the company had decided that our show had run its course and that the Ron and Ron Show was the future for Orlando rock radio mornings. We found out later that the research that they had been conducting did not show that at all, and in fact showed that our show was stronger than ever. In any case, DIZ was their playground, and we were no longer welcome to play. The news hit us pretty hard. In one sense, it was a relief because the pressure we were being put under had become almost unbearable. The newspaper and TV reports of our demise were rapid fire and numerous. We talked to our agent, who advised us to leave Florida and relocate to the Northeast, where there was access to multiple radio markets. I had a wife and kids and suddenly no paycheck. So I put my house up for sale. Mark had no children and his wife had a good job, which allowed them a little less desperation in making their plans. Our contract with DIZ was designed so that we would have to sit out a year to work in Orlando radio again after they fired us. I couldn't wait that long to start earning money to support my family, so I took the agent's advice. I sold my house, moved my family up north with no job waiting. After a few months of staying with family, I found my next morning show at a station called Rock 101, just outside Boston in Manchester, New Hampshire. Mark stayed in Orlando and was eventually able to get back to work, trying to rebuild something on the strength of the legacy we were forced to leave behind. The Ron and Ron Show debuted on DIZ as our replacement, amidst a lot of protest from the Baxter and Mark fans. But the listeners, just like us, had no say in the matter. DIZ management had confidently decided they knew what was best for everyone. Within about 6 months, the Ron and Ron Show defected from DIZ to another competing Orlando rock station. Within a matter of months after that, WDIZ Radio disappeared from the Orlando radio dial forever. For years, DIZ was the rock radio institution in Orlando, Florida, which was a very rock-influenced town during the 80s and 90s. DIZ also had the morning show in town, the show that we built for them, a market franchise that the listeners were very loyal to. The expression, shot themselves in the foot, comes to mind. But that's radio. Orlando turned out to be both the high point as well as the end in the radio story of Baxter and Mark, and ultimately WDIZ as well. Now, as the 20-year anniversary of that dark day approaches, I find myself back in Orlando for the first time. The last few years found both Mark and I wishing for a way to get back together as a team, but never finding it. We were both working separately, without the joy, at smaller and smaller radio jobs, both reaching the point where we were very unhappy with our careers. The onslaught of corporate radio since the late 90s, when Wall Street got into the radio business, had killed the dream for a lot of people like us. In hindsight, we did get to have the fun jobs of a lifetime, at least for a while. This last year since Mark's death, I have quit a job at a small station in Colorado, moved in with family in Virginia, and now returned here to Orlando. I have created a website, baxterandmark.com, as a home for these chronicles. It's a place where people can go and listen for free to some stuff from our old show and hear these stories. There's also now an internet recreation of DIZ online, a web-based radio station that is run not by a radio corporation, but by some of the former talent from DIZ, including our former co-worker and DIZ afternoon guy, Mick Dolan. And they've been wanting me to become involved with it. Amazingly, as both Mark and I found out when Facebook came along in 2008, that even now, after nearly 20 years, there are still Baxter and Mark fans in Orlando. So, for me, it's a place where my name still means something, despite the best efforts of some of the worst radio companies. So I'll probably hang around a bit and see if I can bring back some memories for those fans of our old show. I know now that our show together was the experience of a lifetime. For those of you who chose to go on this journey with me by listening to the Baxter and Mark Chronicles, thank you.